My name is Brooke Mitchell, and I'm 29 years old. Sometimes life writes ironies so perfect they seem fictional. My traditional parents downed me because I was born female, not the son they wanted. They made it clear I would never be enough. 10 years later, my company is worth millions, and suddenly I'm getting calls from family who once erased me. The same people who said women can't succeed now want a piece of what I've built without them. Funny how money changes everything. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit subscribe and like if you've ever had to prove someone wrong who underestimated you. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I grew up in Oakage, a suburban neighborhood in Connecticut where perfectly manicured lawns matched the perfectly maintained appearances of families like mine. My parents, Harold and Eleanor Mitchell, were first-generation Americans who carried their traditional values with them like precious heirlooms. My father built a moderately successful construction company from nothing, something he reminded us of daily. It was his proof that the American dream worked if you had the right stuff. And in his mind, the right stuff was exclusively masculine. From my earliest memories, I understood the hierarchy in our household. My two older brothers, Richard and Nicholas, were the princes of our family kingdom. They were the heirs to my father's business, the carriers of the Mitchell name, and the focus of my parents' pride. Richard was 5 years older than me, athletic and charismatic like my father. Nicholas, 3 years my senior, was studious and serious, the brains who would handle the financial side of the family business someday. Then there was me, the disappointment from day one. My mother once let slip after too many glasses of wine at Thanksgiving that when the doctor announced I was a girl, my father didn't speak to her for 3 days. We already had names picked out for our third son, she explained, as if this somehow justified his reaction. I was 7 when I overheard this, hiding under the dining table while the adults talked freely, thinking the children were playing outside. Some things you never forget, no matter how young you are when you hear them. I tried everything to earn my father's approval. When I brought home straight A's, he would glance at my report card and say, "That's nice, Brooke," before turning to Nicholas to ask about his B in algebra with far more concern and attention. When I won the science fair in 5th grade, my mother patted my head and said, "That's lovely, dear, but don't get too caught up in all that. Boys don't like girls who are too smart." Meanwhile, Richard's participation ribbon for football was framed and displayed in the living room. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother, Evelyn. She lived with us until I was 12, occupying the small guest room at the end of the hall. When no one was looking, she would slip me books about female scientists, artists, and entrepreneurs. "They tried to keep these women down, too," she'd whisper, her eyes twinkling with conspiracy. Look what they did anyway. Our home was beautiful, but cold. A 4-bedroom colonial with dark wood and stern family portraits. The dining room, where we were required to gather every evening at precisely 6:30 p.m., felt more like a boardroom. My father sat at the head, my mother at the foot, brothers on one side, and me alone on the other. Conversation revolved around the business, sports, or my brother's achievements. I became skilled at being invisible, a ghost at my own dinner table. The Mitchell Construction Company was my father's pride and joy. Founded when he was just 25, he had built it from a one-man operation into a regional contender with 30 employees. The company logo was emblazoned on everything from his coffee mug to the matching jackets my brothers received on their 16th birthdays. I never got a jacket. When I asked why, my father laughed and said, "What would be the point? You'll just get married and change your name anyway." School became my sanctuary. There at least achievement was achievement regardless of gender. My teachers praised my writing, my analytical mind, my hunger to learn. Miss Thompson, my 8th grade English teacher, once told me, "Brooke, you have the kind of mind that could change the world." I held those words close on the darkest days when the silence at home threatened to convince me I was truly nothing. By 14, I had figured out that I would need to carve my own path. The family business would never be mine, regardless of my capabilities. While Richard and Nicholas were taken to job sites on weekends and taught the intricacies of contracts and construction, I taught myself business principles from library books. I started small, a babysitting service that I systematized with scheduled bookings, emergency contacts, and standardized rates. By 16, I had 8 other teenagers working under my management, serving 20 families in our neighborhood. I made enough to start a modest savings account that I kept secret from my family. My mother was a complex figure in my life. In public, she played the devoted wife and mother, complimenting my father's decisions and deferring to his judgment. In private moments, I sometimes caught glimpses of regret in her eyes, especially when she thought no one was looking. Once, after I won a prestigious writing competition, she slipped a small gift box under my pillow, a beautiful fountain pen with an inscription, "Write your own story." When I thanked her the next day, she quickly hushed me and said, "Don't mention it to your father." That pen became my most treasured possession, a small acknowledgement that at least one parent saw potential in me. Despite these small moments of connection, my mother never stood against my father. When he criticized my ambitions or dismissed my achievements, she would look down at her plate or suddenly become very interested in adjusting the table settings. Her silence was its own kind of rejection. As high school progressed, the divide between my brothers and me grew more pronounced. Richard had joined the family business right after high school, skipping college altogether. Nicholas was accepted to our father's alma mater, where he would study business administration before joining the company. Their futures were mapped out, secured, and celebrated. Mine remained a question mark that no one in my family seemed interested in answering. By the time I reached my senior year of high school, the distance between my reality and my brothers had become a chasm. Richard, at 23, had already been promoted to site manager at Mitchell Construction. Nicholas was entering his junior year at State University, his entire tuition and expenses covered by our parents. Meanwhile, I was filling out scholarship applications every night until my hand cramped. The college discussion in our house was brief and brutal. Over Sunday dinner, I carefully brought up the acceptance letters I'd received, including one from Westfield University, a prestigious school known for its business program. "That's a very expensive school," my father said, not looking up from his pot roast. "I know, but I've been awarded a partial scholarship and I was hoping that maybe." "We're already paying for Nicholas's education," he interrupted, "and the business had a tough quarter. There's nothing left for yours." "But you always said education was important," I countered, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. My father finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of annoyance and dismissal. "It is important for the people who will use it. Nicholas will bring his degree back to the family business. What would be the point of spending all that money on you?" My mother stared intently at her plate. Richard smirked. Nicholas at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I could bring my degree back to the family business too," I said. A last desperate attempt. The laugh that erupted from my father felt like a physical blow. Women aren't built for success in construction. "Brooke, or most businesses really. You'll get married, have kids, and whatever money we spent on your education would be wasted. No, you can go to community college if you want to play at having a career before settling down." That night, I cried until there was nothing left in me. Then I got up, washed my face, and made a plan. I would find a way to Westfield without them. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took on 3 part-time jobs, and connected with the financial aid office to arrange a work-study program. By graduation, I had cobbled together enough to make it possible. Barely. When I announced at dinner that I would be attending Westfield, after all, the reactions were telling. My father looked irritated, as if I deliberately inconvenienced him. My mother seemed worried. Richard called me foolish for taking on student debt. Only Nicholas offered a quiet congratulations when the others weren't listening. The summer before college was tense. I worked morning shifts at a coffee shop, afternoon shifts at the library, and weekend shifts at a clothing store. I came home exhausted, often to find my family gathered in the living room or backyard, enjoying leisure time I couldn't afford to take. The contrast was stark. My parents had purchased Nicholas a new car for his upcoming senior year, while I was saving every penny for textbooks. The distance wasn't just financial. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Dinner invitations excluded me with the excuse that you're always working anyway. I became a ghost in my own home, passing through without leaving an impression. A week before I was set to leave for college, I made one final attempt to bridge the gap. I'd spent months developing a business plan for a sustainable addition to my father's construction. "Brooke?" "I'm reviewing contracts," he said, not looking up. "Dad, I've been working on something I'd like you to see." "It's a business proposal for the company." I placed the binder on his desk, my heart pounding. He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "A business proposal from you." "Yes. I've identified an opportunity for Mitchell Construction to enter the sustainable building materials market. The profit margins are higher, and it would position the company as forward-thinking in an industry that's slowly but surely heading in that direction." He stared at me for a long moment, then picked up the binder. I held my breath, hope rising for the first time in years. Maybe this would be the moment he finally saw my value. Instead, without opening it, he tore the proposal in half, then in quarters, the sound of ripping paper deafening in the quiet office. "Don't waste my time with this nonsense," he said, dropping the destroyed pages into his trash bin. "Leave the business to people who understand it." I stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Months of work destroyed in seconds. But more than that, the last thread of hope that I might somehow earn my father's respect was finally irrevocably severed. I walked out without a word, went to my room, and began packing for college. Not just the essentials I'd need for my dorm, but everything that mattered to me. I somehow understood that whatever happened next would change my relationship with my family forever. That night, I called my grandmother, now living in a retirement community 2 states away. When I told her what happened, she was quiet for a long moment. "Brooke, my darling girl," she finally said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Some people cannot see beyond the limitations of their own minds. Your father is one of those people. It is not your job to make him see your worth. It is your job to go out into this world and create a life so magnificent that he will have no choice but to recognize what he missed." Those words became my North Star in the darkness that followed. The final confrontation came 3 days before I was scheduled to leave for Westfield. The tension in the house had been building, my father's disapproval manifesting as cutting remarks and cold silence. My mother hovered anxiously in the background, trapped between her husband's expectations and her daughter's determination. Dinner that night started like any other. My father discussing business with my brothers, my mother serving food, and me sitting quietly, counting the minutes until I could excuse myself. The conversation turned to Nicholas's upcoming senior year and Richard's recent promotion. "Mitchell, men always land on their feet," my father said proudly, raising his glass in a toast to my brothers. Something in me snapped. After years of diminishment, of being treated as less than, I couldn't stay silent anymore. "What about Mitchell women?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The table went quiet. My father lowered his glass slowly, his expression darkening. "Excuse me?" I said. "What about Mitchell women? You talk about the men in this family as if they're the only ones who matter. I'm going to college too. I've worked 3 jobs to make it happen." "Doesn't that deserve acknowledgement?" My father's face reened. "You want acknowledgement for making things difficult? For rejecting my advice and putting yourself in debt? For thinking you know better than your father?" "I want acknowledgement for existing." The words burst out of me, years of hurt behind them. "I have never been enough for you. Just because I was born a girl instead of the 3rd son you wanted. That's enough, Brooke," my mother interjected, her voice trembling. "No, it's not enough," I continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. "I have tried everything to earn a place in this family. Perfect grades, extracurricular achievements, even a business proposal that could have made the company more successful. But nothing works because the problem isn't me. It's you," I said, looking directly at my father. "It's your inability to see value in anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of worth." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You listen to me, young lady. While you live under my roof, you will respect my authority. I built everything this family has. I decide what's valuable and what isn't." "Then I won't live under your roof anymore," I replied, also standing. "I'm leaving for college in 3 days, and maybe I won't come back. If you walk out that door with this attitude, don't bother coming back at all," he said, his voice cold and final. "You want to reject this family's values? Then you reject this family." I looked to my mother, hoping for intervention, support, anything. She sat with tears streaming down her face, but she said nothing. "Mom," I whispered. Listen to your father. Brooke, she finally said, not meeting my eyes. He knows what's best. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. I looked at my brothers, Richard smirking slightly, Nicholas staring at his plate. Is that how everyone feels? I asked, my voice breaking. Silence was my answer. Then I guess this is goodbye, I said, pushing back from the table. Thank you for making this decision easier. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door, leaning against it as sobs racked my body. For nearly an hour, I cried for the family I never really had, for the love I'd spent my life chasing, but never catching. Then, wiping my tears, I began to pack methodically. Clothes, books, the few mementos that mattered, my grandmother's letters, the fountain pen from my mother, photographs of happier times. As I was zipping my final suitcase, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Amanda, my younger sister by 4 years. At 15, she occupied a strange middle ground in our family, not as dismissed as I was, but clearly less valued than our brothers. Are you really leaving? She asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and fear. I have to, Amanda, I said, sitting beside her on the bed. I can't be who they want me to be. Will you come back? I hesitated, not wanting to lie. I don't know, but I'll always be your sister no matter what. And you can always reach me, okay? She nodded, then impulsively hugged me. I'm scared to be here without you, she whispered. You're stronger than you know, I told her, fighting back fresh tears. And in 3 years, if you want to follow me, I'll help you however I can. We exchanged email addresses since I suspected my parents might monitor her phone. Then she slipped back to her room and I finished packing. It was nearly midnight when I carried my bags downstairs. The house was quiet. Everyone retreated to their rooms after the disastrous dinner. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that someone would be waiting to stop me, to apologize, to ask me to stay. The empty living room was my answer. I wrote a brief note. I'll be safe. Don't worry about me, and left it on the kitchen counter. Then I walked out the front door of my childhood home, not knowing if I would ever return. The night air was cool for August, carrying the first hints of autumn. I loaded my bags into my used Honda Civic, purchased with my own savings against my father's advice, and sat in the driver's seat, suddenly paralyzed by the enormity of what was happening. I was 18, alone with only enough money to get me through the first semester, if I was extremely careful. The terror of that reality washed over me, and for a moment, I considered going back inside, apologizing, accepting my place. Instead, I started the car and drove to the cheapest motel I could find on the outskirts of town. The room was small and smelled of old cigarettes, but it was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, the enormity of my situation crashing down on me. Panic rose in my chest. What had I done? How would I survive? Who walks away from the security of family, however flawed? With shaking hands, I called the one person I knew would understand. Grandma, I said when she answered, my voice breaking. I left. They disowned me. Her silence lasted only a second. Where are you now, child? I told her about the motel, about the confrontation, about the terrifying uncertainty ahead of me. Listen to me, Brooke, she said firmly. You did the right thing. Your spirit would have died in that house. I don't have much, but I can send you $1,000 to help you get started. And more importantly, I can give you this advice. Reinvent yourself. The Brooke who needed her parents' approval no longer exists. Decide who you want to be now and become her. After we hung up, I sat in that dingy motel room and made myself a promise. I would never again define myself by someone else's limitations. I would build something that no one could tear up and throw away. I would become someone that even my father couldn't dismiss. That night, Brooke Mitchell, the daughter, died. Brooke Mitchell, the creator of her own destiny, was born. My first year at Westfield University nearly broke me. I lived in the cheapest student housing available, a converted storage room in an off-campus house shared with 5 other students. My schedule was punishing. Full course load during the day, library job in the evenings, weekend shifts at a local cafe, and occasional nighttime hours as a campus security escort. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. The $1,000 from my grandmother helped with textbooks and initial expenses, but it disappeared quickly. I ate ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, calculated every penny, and still sometimes had to choose between buying toilet paper or doing laundry. Winter was the hardest. My room was poorly insulated, and I slept in layers of clothing under every blanket I owned. Despite these challenges, I processed the complicated emotions the reunions had stirred up. The little girl inside me still yearned for parental approval, but the woman I'd become understood that seeking it was a path to continued pain. I made peace with the fact that my father might never change, that my mother might never find the courage to stand against him, that my brothers might always view me through the distorted lens of our upbringing. I couldn't control their perceptions or actions. I could only control my response. With Amanda, I established a relationship independent of the rest of the family. We met for lunch every few weeks, carefully avoiding discussion of our parents unless absolutely necessary. I attended her wedding 6 months later, arriving just before the ceremony and leaving directly after congratulating the couple, thus minimizing interaction with the rest of the family. My mother reached out privately a month after the confrontation, with my father asking to meet for coffee. Our conversation was strained, but represented a small step towards something new. Not the mother-daughter relationship I had craved as a child, but perhaps a measured adult connection based on mutual respect. "I should have stood up for you," she admitted quietly over her latte. I was wrong not to. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of all that had happened, but it was something. A crack in the wall of denial that had characterized my family's approach to our history. As for the Mitchell Construction Company, it filed for bankruptcy protection 3 months after our confrontation. My father was forced to sell most of the assets to pay creditors. Richard and Nicholas had to find jobs with other firms. The family legacy. My father had been so concerned about preserving ended not because of my refusal to help, but because of years of mismanagement and failure to adapt to changing markets. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only sadness for what could have been if pride and prejudice hadn't blinded my father to the value of all his children, regardless of gender. My own company continued to thrive. We expanded into home goods made from recycled materials, opened 3 flagship stores in major cities, and launched a successful e-commerce platform. More importantly, we created scholarship programs for young women entering business, particularly those from backgrounds where their ambitions weren't supported. With each young woman we helped, I healed a little more of my own past wounds. I couldn't change my family's story, but I could help change the stories of others like me. The final communication I received from my father came a year after the bankruptcy. A brief email clearly written in a moment of bitter reflection. "You got what you wanted. The Mitchell name means nothing now." My response was equally brief. "That's where you're wrong. I've given the Mitchell name a meaning it never had before. Innovation, sustainability, and opportunity for all. Your grandchildren, should I have any, will be proud to carry it." He never replied. I hadn't expected him to. 10 years after walking out of my parents' house with nothing but a few suitcases and determination, I stand in the headquarters of Revival. We're now a company valued at over $50 million. The journey from that terrified 18-year-old to the woman I am today at 29 has been filled with challenges, triumphs, and profound life lessons. The most important of these lessons has been learning the difference between family by blood and family by choice. The people who have supported me through my darkest moments: Abigail, who let me crash on her couch when I couldn't make rent; Professor Harper, who believed in my vision when it was just an idea; Maria, Derek, and Kesha, who built Revival where alongside me. These are my true family. They love me for who I am, not for what I can provide or how I fit into their expectations. This understanding led me to create the New Foundations Initiative, a program that provides mentorship and seed funding to young women from unsupportive backgrounds who have entrepreneurial dreams. So far, we've helped launch 27 businesses, from a mobile veterinary clinic serving rural communities to an innovative educational technology platform. Each of these women has her own story of overcoming limitation and rejection, and each is writing a new ending to that story. My relationship with my sister Amanda has evolved into something beautiful and supportive. After her wedding, she began to question many of the values we were raised with. 2 years ago, she left her teaching position to join Revivalware's educational outreach program, where she develops curriculum about sustainable business practices for high schools and colleges. Her husband, Michael, a kind and progressive man who couldn't be more different from our father, fully supports her career. My mother and I maintain a careful relationship based on clearly defined boundaries. After my father's business collapsed, she found herself having to create an identity separate from being his wife for the first time in decades. She went back to school to finish the degree she'd abandoned when they married, and now works as a counselor for women in transition. We meet for lunch monthly, discussing neutral topics and occasionally, when she's ready, processing small pieces of our complicated past. "I'm sorry I taught you that your worth was tied to male approval," she told me during one such lunch. "I believed it about myself for so long that I didn't know how to teach you differently." Her apology, while not erasing the past, opened the door to healing I hadn't thought possible. My brothers have taken different paths. Richard, still struggling with the collapse of his expected inheritance, maintains minimal contact with me, usually only at family events we both attend for Amanda's sake. Nicholas surprisingly reached out after hitting rock bottom post-bankruptcy. He asked for a job at Revivalware, and after much consideration, I offered him an entry-level position in our logistics department with the clear understanding that he would receive no special treatment and would be evaluated solely on his performance. 2 years later, he's worked his way up to regional distribution manager, earning the respect of his colleagues through genuine effort rather than family connection. Our relationship has evolved into a tentative friendship based on mutual respect, something I never thought possible given our upbringing. As for my father, we remain estranged. His pride never allowed him to truly acknowledge the harm he caused, or the opportunities he missed by limiting his vision of success to only his sons. The last I heard, he works as a consultant for a small construction firm, a shadow of his former role as owner and co. I feel sadness for what could have been. But I no longer feel responsibility for his choices or their consequences. My grandmother, whose belief in me never wavered, passed away last year at 93. In her will, she left me her collection of books about pioneering women, the same books she had secretly shared with me as a child. They occupy a special shelf in my office, a reminder that someone saw my potential even when those who should have seen it most clearly were blind to it. The journey of healing is ongoing. There are still moments when the old wounds reopen. Holidays, certain songs, the scent of my mother's perfume caught unexpectedly in a crowded elevator. In those moments, I remind myself that my worth was never determined by my family's ability to recognize it. It was always there, waiting for me to claim it for myself. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or rejected for who you are, know this. The limitations others place on you are reflections of their fear and ignorance, not your potential. Your worth is intrinsic. Your path is yours to determine. Building a life on your own terms isn't easy. There will be moments of doubt, nights of tears, and days when giving up seems like the only option. In those moments, look for the helpers. They are always there if you're willing to be vulnerable enough to let them in. Create your chosen family from people who celebrate your victories and support you through defeats. Learn to be that person, for others as well. And perhaps most importantly, when you achieve success, however you define it, remember to send the elevator back down. Use your platform, your resources, and your experience to create opportunities for others facing the same barriers you once faced. In doing so, you transform your personal triumph into a legacy of positive change. Thank you for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and reinvention. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by family approval. And I'd love to know in the comments, what limiting belief about yourself did you have to overcome to pursue your dreams? How did you find the courage to defy others' expectations? Remember, the family that matters most is the one that loves you for exactly who you are, whether that's the family you were born into or the one you create along the way. Until next time, this is Brooke Mitchell reminding you that sometimes being downed is just the first step to owning your true self.